The town of Millbrook sat in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place where Friday night lights burned brighter than the sun on Sunday morning. For decades, Millbrook High School's basketball team had been mediocre at best, a source of quiet disappointment in a town that craved something to cheer about. But 3 years ago, everything changed. A group of young black athletes, Jamal Reynolds, Lamar Washington, Darnell Hayes, and Terence King, had grown up together on the cracked asphalt courts of the East Side projects, and they had turned Millbrook's luck around. Jamal was the point guard with eyes in the back of his head, a boy who could thread a pass through a needle from half court. Lamar was a defensive wall, all wingspan and instinct. Darnell brought the muscle under the basket, and Terence had a jump shot so pure it looked like the net was afraid of him. They were inseparable, brothers in every way that mattered, and they had led the Millbrook Lions to the brink of a state championship for the first time in 30 years. But the man pacing the sidelines in a pressed polo shirt and a permanent scowl was not the man who had recruited them. Coach Bill Coleman had arrived that summer, hired by a school board that whispered about teen culture and discipline while pointedly not looking at the color of the boys who filled the starting lineup. Coleman was a transplant from a neighboring county, a man with a reputation for old-school values, and a photograph in his office of the last Millbrook team to win a championship, an all-white squad from 1987. He spoke often about fundamentals and execution in a way that suggested he saw something fundamentally wrong with the boys who had actually won him his first games. Lucas Coleman, his son, was a junior guard who came off the bench, a decent player but nothing special, a boy who had inherited his father's last name but mercifully little of his disposition. The championship game was exactly 1 week away when Coach Coleman called a closed-door practice. The gymnasium echoed with the squeak of sneakers and the rhythmic thump of basketballs until Coleman's whistle sliced through the air like a blade. He gathered the team at center court, his eyes scanning the faces before him with an expression that the boys had learned to read as disapproval. He pointed to Jamal, then Lamar, then Darnell, then Terence, his finger moving deliberately from one black face to another. "You four," he said, his voice carrying no emotion. "Hit the showers. You're benched for the championship. I'm starting Lucas, Thompson, Reynolds, Miller, and Peterson." The names he listed were all white. The gym fell into a silence so complete that you could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. Jamal stood frozen, the basketball slipping from his fingers and bouncing once, twice before rolling away. Terence opened his mouth to speak, but Jamal put a hand on his chest and shook his head slowly. They walked off the court without a word, their footsteps echoing like gunshots in the hollow space. Lucas Coleman stood among the white players his father had named, his face pale and his hands trembling. He looked at his father, then at the backs of his teammates walking away, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. That night, the news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, dividing the town along familiar fault lines. The diner on Main Street buzzed with arguments, old men shaking their heads and young waitresses slamming coffee pots in frustration. The black community on the East Side held an emergency meeting at the community center, where Pastor Williams stood before a crowd of angry parents and grandparents and urged patience and prayer, even as his own fists clenched at his sides. Jamal's mother, Sarah Reynolds, a woman who worked double shifts as a nurse to keep her family afloat, sat in the front row with tears streaming down her face and said nothing at all. The next 3 days were a study in silent endurance. Jamal, Lamar, Darnell, and Terence attended school as usual, walking the halls with their heads high, even as whispers followed them like shadows. Teachers avoided eye contact. Some students sneered, others offered awkward apologies. The 4 boys ate lunch together at their usual table, speaking little but drawing strength from each other's presence. Lucas Coleman sat across the cafeteria with his father's chosen starters, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. He had tried to talk to his father at home, but Coach Coleman had shut him down with a look that brooked no argument. "You're a starter on a championship team. Act like it," his father had said. On the day before the game, Lucas walked out of chemistry class and found Jamal leaning against the lockers, waiting for him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They had been teammates for 3 years, had shared hotel rooms on road trips and celebrated victories with Gatorade showers. Jamal had taught Lucas how to read a zone defense, had stayed after practice to help him with his free throws. Now they stood on opposite sides of a divide neither of them had created. "Your dad's making a mistake," Jamal said quietly. His voice wasn't angry, it was sad, tired, resigned. Lucas opened his mouth, but Jamal held a hand. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I just wanted you to know that. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're still brothers." He walked away before Lucas could respond, leaving the white boy standing alone in the empty hallway with tears burning behind his eyes. Game day arrived with the kind of electric tension that precedes a storm. The Millbrook gymnasium was packed to the rafters, standing room only, fans spilling into the aisles. The visiting team, Westbrook, was undefeated and heavily favored, a powerhouse with a D1 prospect at center. The Millbrook Lions took the court without Jamal, Lamar, Darnell, and Terence, who sat on the bench in their warm-up suits, watching in silence as the game began. The crowd erupted when Lucas tipped off, but the energy quickly soured. Westbrook scored on their first possession with embarrassing ease, their center overpowering Millbrook's smaller white defenders under the basket. On offense, the ball moved sluggishly, passes arriving a split second too late, shots clanking off the rim with sickening thuds. By the end of the first quarter, Westbrook led 24-6. Lucas had turned the ball over 3 times and missed both shots he had attempted. Coach Coleman paced the sidelines, shouting instructions that nobody seemed to hear. He called timeouts that accomplished nothing. He substituted players in and out like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The second quarter was worse. Westbrook's lead ballooned to 45-18 by halftime, and the Millbrook crowd had gone from roaring to murmuring to a kind of embarrassed silence. Only the East Side section remained vocal, their cheers for Jamal and the others cutting through the gloom like lighthouse beacons. Lucas Coleman walked into the locker room at halftime with his head down, his jersey soaked with sweat, his heart pounding with a mixture of shame and something else he couldn't name. In the locker room, Coach Coleman screamed. He blamed the referees, blamed the crowd, blamed the Westbrook players for being too physical. He did not blame his son or the white starters he had chosen. Lucas sat on a bench with a towel over his head, listening to his father's voice grow louder and more desperate. When the rant finally ended, the team filed back onto the court for the second half, and Lucas found himself walking next to Marcus Thompson, one of the white starters. "We're getting killed out there," Marcus muttered. Lucas said nothing. He looked at the bench where Jamal sat, his face unreadable, and felt something inside him begin to crack. The third quarter was a slaughter. Westbrook's coach pulled his starters midway through, substituting his bench players to give them experience. Millbrook still couldn't score. The lead grew to 78-32 with 1 minute left in the third quarter. Lucas looked at his father, who stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold fury directed at everyone except the one person responsible. And in that moment, Lucas Coleman understood something with absolute clarity. His father was wrong. He had always been wrong, and Lucas had been complicit by staying silent.
When the third quarter ended, Lucas walked to the bench and sat down. He did not look at his father. He unlaced his sneakers, pulled them off, and set them neatly under the bench. Then he stood up, walked past his father without a word, and stopped in front of Jamal. The gymnasium had grown quiet, the remaining crowd sensing something shift. Lucas looked at Jamal, at Lamar, at Darnell, at Terence. His voice cracked when he finally spoke, but it carried in the silence. "I'm not playing," he said. Coach Coleman strode over, his face purple with rage. "Sit down, Lucas, now!" Lucas ignored him. He kept his eyes on Jamal. "They're my brothers," he said. "I won't play without my brothers." The gymnasium erupted. Half the crowd cheered, the other half booed. Coach Coleman grabbed Lucas by the arm, but Lucas pulled away with a strength he didn't know he possessed. He turned to face his father, and for the first time he looked him in the eye without flinching. "You're wrong, Dad. You've been wrong this whole time. These 4 guys are the reason this team exists. They're the reason anyone even bought tickets this year. And you benched them because you couldn't see past their skin? I'm ashamed to be your son right now." The silence that followed was absolute. Coach Coleman's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The referee walked over, unsure what to do. The Westbrook players stood watching from their bench, a mixture of confusion and respect on their faces. Jamal Reynolds stood up slowly. He looked at Lucas, and something passed between them. Years of friendship, trust, brotherhood. He turned to his 3 friends, and they had a conversation without words, the kind of communication that comes from growing up together on cracked asphalt courts. Then Jamal looked at the referee. "We want to play," he said. The referee looked at Coach Coleman, who stood frozen, his authority crumbling around him. "Coach, your players want to sub in." Coleman said nothing. He couldn't speak. The referee shrugged and waved Jamal, Lamar, Darnell, and Terence onto the court. Lucas grabbed a jersey from one of the white starters, who willingly surrendered it, pulled it on, and jogged to his position. The scoreboard read 75-37 with 1 quarter left. It was impossible. Everyone knew it. But the Millbrook crowd, now galvanized, rose to their feet as one. The East Side section led the cheers, but white fans joined in, neighbors standing together for the first time in memory. Westbrook brought their starters back in, sensing danger. Jamal took the inbound pass and moved up the court like water flowing downhill. He crossed half court, faked left, drove right, and dished to Lamar, who hit Darnell cutting to the basket. Darnell scored, drew the foul, and completed the 3-point play. 75-40. Westbrook inbounded, but Terence picked the pass clean, pulled up from 3-point range, and swished it. 75-43. The crowd roared. Westbrook's point guard tried to settle the offense, but Lamar stripped him, outraced everyone, and laid it in. 75-45. The Westbrook coach called timeout, his players looking shaken. In the huddle, Jamal gathered his brothers and Lucas. "We're not going to win," he said calmly, "but we're going to make them remember this game for the rest of their lives. We're going to show everyone what we could have been." They went back onto the court and played the most beautiful quarter of basketball Millbrook had ever seen. It wasn't just scoring, it was artistry. Behind-the-back passes, no-look dishes, perfectly timed cuts, defensive rotations so precise they looked choreographed. Lucas played the best basketball of his life, hitting 2 3-pointers and assisting on 3 more baskets. With each possession, the lead shrank, 80-60, 85-70, 90-82. The Westbrook players, talented as they were, began to panic. They had never faced anything like this, not just skill, but heart, purpose, brotherhood. With 30 seconds left, the score stood at 98-94, Westbrook still ahead. Millbrook had the ball. Jamal brought it up, the crowd on its feet, the noise deafening. He drove, drew 2 defenders, and kicked to Lucas in the corner. Lucas caught the ball, set his feet, and released a 3-pointer that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. It swished through the net with a sound like tearing paper. 98-97. Westbrook inbounded, and Millbrook immediately fouled. Their best free throw shooter stepped to the line, missed the first, made the second. 99-97, with 8 seconds left. Jamal took the inbound pass and flew up the court. He crossed half court with 3 seconds, pulled up from 30 feet, and let it fly. The buzzer sounded. The ball arced through the air, a perfect parabola, and dropped through the net without touching the rim. The gymnasium exploded, 99-100. Millbrook had won. In the chaos that followed, players from both teams embraced. The Westbrook center, a 7-foot giant, lifted Jamal off his feet and hugged him. The referee retrieved the game ball and handed it to Lucas. But the most important moment happened at center court, where Coach Bill Coleman stood alone, his world in ruins. His son walked toward him, and for a moment, everyone wondered what would happen. Lucas stopped a few feet away.
"I'm moving in with Mom," he said quietly. "I'll come back for my stuff next week." He turned and walked away, joining Jamal and the others in a victory huddle that did not include his father. The next morning, the Millbrook Town Council held an emergency meeting. By unanimous vote, Coach Bill Coleman was terminated effective immediately. The school board issued a public apology to Jamal, Lamar, Darnell, and Terence, and announced that the assistant coach would lead the team for the state tournament. But the boys had already made their decision. At a press conference held in the high school gymnasium, Jamal Reynolds stood at a podium surrounded by his brothers. "We've decided to forfeit the state tournament," he announced. Reporters gasped. "We proved what we needed to prove last night. Basketball isn't about trophies, it's about family, and we're walking away together as brothers on our own terms. That's worth more than any championship." Lucas Coleman enrolled in the county school where his mother taught, finishing his senior year in a place where nobody knew his father's name. He and Jamal spoke every week, their friendship stronger than ever. 3 years later, Lucas transferred to the same state university where Jamal had earned a basketball scholarship, and they became roommates. At their graduation, Sarah Reynolds sat in the front row next to Lucas's mother, two women who had found common ground in raising boys who understood what truly mattered. The photograph from that graduation hung in the Millbrook Community Center for decades, a reminder of the night when a town learned to see past color and a coach's son learned that some bonds are worth more than victory.